Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Jets, episode 278. What is going on? Matt O'Leary hanging out with you. And we are going to get into some predictions this week. And of course, your voicemails. It's probably the quietest time in the NFL right now, these next few weeks from when mini camp and OTAs end up until training camp. So we could get into some interesting topics over the next few weeks and kind of go outside the box. But what I wanted to do today was predict who I think is going to be training camp breakout stars. And, you know, we're not going to go obvious here. It's not going to be like, oh, Garrett Wilson's going to have a great camp. Like, I'm talking, you know, for example, last year, it felt like Quantez Stiggers, Eric Watts, Braylon Allen, Leonard Taylor, guys like that who were standing out. UDFAs, day 3 picks 2 years ago. It was the summer of Xavier Gipson and Jason Brownlee. Guys like that. That's kind of the realm that I'll be looking at today. Did want to mention, thought it'd be a good time to bring up that if you are interested, Talking Jets is doing our group outing for week 1 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tickets on sale at talkingjets.com. Ticket includes tailgate with Tailgate Joe, post-game field access, and you sit with a group of deranged Jet fans. It's a whole lot of fun. We're also doing a festival the day before, an NFL kickoff party, if you will, with Bezara. We'll be out there, so tickets are on sale for that as well. You could do a whole package, and you get the Saturday and Sunday thing. Really excited for both of those big events. All right, so who are going to be this year's breakout candidates? Drum roll, drum roll. All right. I have 3 names in mind for the New York Jets. 1 offense, 2 defensively. And again, I'm not going to go bigger names. You can at home if you're playing along at home or want to comment down below on YouTube if you're watching. Who you think is going to stand out, totally fine. But I'm going to go sort of outside the box. First name, Jamal Pritchett, who has honestly stood out a little bit at OTAs and minicamp. So who is Jamal Pritchett? UDFA from this year. Pretty much a return specialist / wide receiver. Now, I don't think we're going to get to see him much as a wide receiver in training camp, but he has stood out. He got a call out in a positive way from Chris Banjo, the Jets special teams coach, as a potential returner and special teamer. And history shows if you're a UDFA and you're trying to make a roster, the best way to do that is you usually have to have some special teams ability. So he has that. It's also a position of need for the Jets. You look at punt returner, the last 2 years it's been Xavier Gipson. He won that job as a UDFA, as a rookie in 2023. Had a great moment his first game as a pro, and just really hasn't done a whole lot since then. So they're probably looking to upgrade the punt returner. It could be someone already on this roster, but Jamal Pritchett's a name to watch in that role. I think, you know, again, he's a little bit undersized. That's why he wasn't drafted, 5'8", 175 pounds, but he has decent speed. He's played special teams in college, and he's standing out so far. So for me, I think that's a name, again, that makes some sense from the offense / special team side of things. Defensively, I have 2 names. One is a little bit bigger than the other, but we'll start with another UDFA. Dean Clark, safety, the son of Ryan Clark. He has good size and speed, which you would hope for someone at the NFL, right? But to me, a big reason why he wasn't drafted was very inconsistent. I think he needs to be coached up a little bit. And I know it's a rookie staff. They're young. I get that. But if there's anything that I have faith in Aaron Glenn, and specifically Glenn and Steve Wilkes and the secondary coaches, I think they're going to get a lot out of these guys. Similar to what, you know, maybe we saw with Sauce Gardner as a 4th overall pick, so that's not necessarily fair. But Michael Carter, late round pick, turned into a plus starter. You know, the Quantez Stiggers was the big name last summer. You also had Brandon Eccles, kind of day 3 guy who had a little bit of a role for a few years. I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to squeeze the most out of Ryan Clark as a coaching staff. I think he has a shot to make this team. I mentioned it with Pritchett. Special teams experience is important, and he has that too. Dean Clark has played special teams in college, and I wouldn't be surprised if he makes some plays in training camp. The last one, I hinted a little bit of a bigger name, but not to the point where I'm going to be talking about like a first-round pick or something like that. But I'm going to say AZ Thomas. And that's a really interesting one because he's looked good in minicamp and OTAs. Third-round pick at corner. I think he's going to give Brandon Stevens a real run for his money. Because Brandon Stevens, and again, I understand it's only so far in minicamp and OTAs. The pads haven't come on yet. Things can change. I agree. But Stevens has had a slow start. He hasn't looked great so far in the offseason, training. And AZ Thomas has made plays. And I think long-term, AZ is the guy who's eventually going to be this team's long-term starter. But what makes it such an interesting situation is they gave Brandon Stevens all this money. So what do? Are they going to start AZ Thomas, the rookie, over the guy that they just paid $12 million a year to be the corner two? Or are they going to go, you know what? We just gave this guy all this money. We have to start him out of the gate. I would be surprised if Thomas just flat out wins this starting job, so to speak. But I think we're going to be looking throughout summer and going, we are not very far from the days of AZ Thomas. And if Stevens is struggling and then is starting and through the first 4 games of the year or so is not looking so hot, they're going to be trying to get AZ Thomas on the field a lot more. And that's what I'm expecting this summer. And again, are there other guys on this team who I think will have good training camps? Yes, of course, bigger names, but kind of wanted to go with, I have a 3rd-round pick, I have 2 UDFAs, and it's just prediction based, guys who I think are going to do it. And that's hard to predict for UDFAs. Maybe it's someone else that I didn't mention, but curious to see what you guys think. Who do you think is going to stand out at training camp? Some under the radar training camp heroes, if you will. So let's see. Let me know in the comments or on socials. All right, let's get to voicemails. We start with Ralph, who wants to talk wide receiver room.
What is going on, Matt? Ralph from Long Island. I'd like to talk some receiving room to you. So you've been down a lot on pretty much the idea of getting Amari Cooper to the Jets. Here's my thought on it. The Jets receiver room, the way it is now, honestly, I'm kind of okay with it. I think they can be good. Are they scary? No, not by any means, but they have potential to be a pretty solid receiver room. The only issue that I feel they have is what happens if Garrett Wilson gets hurt. Now, that's where Amari Cooper comes into play. He's a pretty cheap veteran. Do we need him to do a lot when Garrett Wilson is healthy? No, we don't need him to do too much. What would he probably do? Maybe push Lazard to the bench. Obviously, he has better hands than Lazard, even at his age he is. Another thing, I feel like the Jets do have a history for taking big-name receivers at the end of their career and getting a lot out of them before they finally retire. And second, even though Amari Cooper hasn't been too great, he did make some big plays for Buffalo last year. I remember he had one big-time touchdown in the back of the end zone, landed on his back, and then he had that other play where he was getting tackled and lateraled the ball to Josh Allen for a touchdown. So pretty much, yeah. If God forbid Garrett gets hurt, that's a guy that I feel like is cheap. He can come in, handle the number 1 role, has a good veteran presence for our young receivers, keeps Josh Reynolds in the number 2 spot, keeps Taylor right where he is, and kind of allows us to not skip too much of a beat, God forbid the worst happens to Garrett Wilson, which obviously we don't want happening, but at least we don't need to rely on young talent potentially being good or not. So I do think getting Amari Cooper would definitely put some depth at that receiver position. And like I said, I'm totally fine with putting Lazard onto the bench and having Amari Cooper in that role. Whether it's him as the 3 or him as the 2, Reynolds as the 3 or Reynolds as the 2. All right, let me know your thoughts on that and if I changed your mind at all on Amari Cooper.
Yeah, thank you so much for the call. What I appreciate, Ralph, is I don't think I'm going to all the way around and be like, yeah, let's campaign for the Amari Cooper signing. But I think what I can appreciate is you're not necessarily saying that he's the guy that he was in Dallas 5 years ago. I feel like some of this conversation's been, oh, that's just a name that we know, and he's been on my fantasy team, and he's great. And last year in Buffalo, I thought there were some signs of him really slowing down. But you brought up in the playoffs, he had a big game or a decent game in one of them. I want to pull it up. It might have been against Buffalo. He had 4 for 33 against Buffalo. He had his 1 touchdown with Buffalo against the Jets. He had 3 catches for 56 yards. He did have another game against the Rams where he had 6 for 95. But outside of that, he really didn't do a ton. The drops were something that is starting to scare me a little bit with him. He had 8, which is the same number as Lazard did last year. His drop rate isn't as high because he had more targets, so that's a plus, I guess. But I hear what you're saying on Garrett. I think you're screwed regardless if Garrett Wilson gets hurt. I don't think there's someone currently available, whether you're an Amari guy or a Keenan Allen guy, who's going to save you. But I hear what you're saying on someone who's played in that role before, like they've been a wide receiver 1 before. They might not be that same guy, and there might be some value in that. I'd be surprised if the Jets made a move like that. I think they're okay with how their wide receiver room looks right now, but who knows? Right? There's another few weeks before training camp begins. I would think he likely wants to go to a contender, and I don't view the Jets in that role. But I appreciate your points. I think you brought up some good reasoning on the pro side of it, and better reasoning than I've heard so far. So I take that, and you should take that as a win. We'll go to Max from New Jersey up next. He wants to stick on the wide receiver side and talk some stat predictions.
Hi, this is Max calling in from home to New Jersey, and today let's talk about some stat predictions. So each week, leading up to the 2025 NFL season, we're going to predict some stats for each position group for the New York Jets, and then the first position group I want to evaluate is the wide receiver room. I want to predict is the wide receiver room. So first off, Garrett Wilson, I think he's going to have 95 receptions for 1,160 yards and 9 touchdowns. Next up, I think that Al Lazard is going to have 50 receptions for 750 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then Aaron Smith, I think he's going to have 45 receptions for 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then Malachi Corley is going to have 25 receptions for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's mainly going to be used as a punt returner this season. I said in the last show that Malachi Corley was going to be used as a punt returner.
Okay.
And then for Xavier Gipson, I think he could be a punt returner for this team. I think he's going to have a kick returner, but Xavier Gipson will be the number 4, number 5 wide receiver. I think he's going to have 25 receptions for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. What are your thoughts on my stat predictions for the wide receiver room and go Jets?
I think they're too high. Not for Garrett. I think the Garrett one is pretty fair, but just looking at wide receivers before you get to Mason Taylor's numbers, before you get to Breece Hall's numbers, you have 23 passing touchdowns. I don't think we're going to see, honestly, that number in total, even including for Justin Fields, the tight ends and running backs, and already right around, or maybe even just over, if my math is correct, 3,000 passing yards, not including the tight ends or running backs. So unless Justin Fields is going to throw for 4,200 yards and 30 touchdowns, I would be surprised if we see that much volume to some of the guys you listed off. Josh Reynolds wasn't listed as any of the 5 names you brought up. I think he should be. I would include him over guys like Corley and Gibson, who I think are fringe roster guys. I think 750 for Lazard's optimistic. I think 600 for Smith is optimistic. But I think I think you're the closest on Garrett. I think you're a little too high on everyone else. And just because, again, I think they're going to be a much more run heavy team. So I'm interested to see when you get to running backs, kind of what you think it's going to look like from a rushing perspective and Fields from a rushing perspective. But I think the numbers are too high for the guys who aren't outside of Garrett. Garrett's numbers seem pretty spot on. I think maybe a little bit more yardage, not a ton, but a little bit more yards. But I think Lazard and Smith and Corley's a little on the optimistic side. Let's go to PG. Peter first, then PG. Peter wants to talk special teams, rounding out his roster predictions.
Hey, Matt. It's Peter calling from over the beautiful Hudson Valley on this Sunday evening with the conclusion to my three-part roster prediction series with the specialists. So I forgot to mention in last week's call about the defense that the total of that was also 24 players, just like the offense. I did not plan it to be exactly 24 even on both, but it worked out that way.
It worked.
So that actually leaves 5 positions available as specialists. So I think Caden Davis and Kai Kroger will win out the battles at kicker and punter, and I'm guessing Kroger will then wind up being the new holder as well. Thomas Hennessy will still be the long snapper, and I think we will also keep Kenny Onwu as the kick returner, and then Chris Boyd will be the specialist replacing Irv Charles with this regime and this roster. So that's the 5 additional guys that make up the 53. Now, to go to the practice squad, I think Cook will be the quarterback. I think Beck will retain at fullback. I think Brandon Smith, Quentin Skinner, and Xavier Gibson will now be on the practice squad. I think Wygand, the guard/tackle, Cole Lavano, and Gus Hartwig will be the backup offensive lineman. I think either Braden McGregor or Rashad Weaver. It seems like Rashad Weaver had good OTAs and stuff, so he'll probably be on the practice squad, maybe really on the roster. And either Molba or Page, those interior guys, along with Tufele, will be on the interior on the practice squad. I think they'll keep Bartlett at linebacker and possibly Aaron Smith as well. In the secondary, Jarius Monroe will be there at safety, and the 2 Clarks will also be there on the practice squad. And I think they'll also keep Weston, who's the defensive end / gunner that will wind up, being a special teams ace for them as well. They can call up, as needed. Now, one of the main reasons I think that we can get away with, and I don't remember if that totals 17 or not, but if it does, we can put Wygand as the international player, and he'll replace Obina Eze, and that way we get to keep 17 on the practice squad, or a total of 70 players. 53 on the roster, 17 there. By the way, the reason I went this route with overall how I decided to choose guys is I think the new regime wants their guys for the most part at this point. So there'll be a lot of cleaning house of people that were kind of hangers-on of the last couple of years that were mostly salary guys, and they're going to be gone. People like Clemens, Marcelino McCurry-Ball, who's been a specialist, Irv Charles is going to go bye-bye, people like that. So that's my thoughts to complete my roster predictions. If you have any thoughts on it as well, let me know. And as always, go Jets.
I think you're pretty close, right? Like we'd be squabbling over some special teamers maybe, but I think you pretty much nailed it. I like the point that you made with the practice squad where kind of Salah's guys begin to go, and that's where we see the depth of this team, whether it's back end of the roster or practice squad guys, where you see this staff and this regime start to add in the talent that they want, right? Like that, yes, there's going to be holdovers from the previous staff, but they want to put their fingerprints on this roster. And I think that's the best way to do it. I did a video on it yesterday, and by the time this call came in, this person wasn't signed, but I am rooting for Harrison Mevis for the kicking spot. Now, Caden Davis, the rookie, it'd be nice to see him. The UDFA would be nice to see him, but the Jets signed a UFL kicker who is nicknamed the Thicker Kicker. He's a big boy, 6 foot, 242 pounds, something like that. Electric. The guy is absolutely electric. He was fantastic in the UFL last year, missed only 1 kick. He had a 56-yarder in a playoff game last year. At Missouri, he hit a 61-yard game-winning field goal, ice in his veins. That's my guy. I hope he is awesome, just as awesome as he was in the UFL during the summer. And that if he is, then I think he will be the kicker. And how awesome would it be to have the thicker kicker, a gimmick as the kicker? Some Sebastian Janikowski get vibes with the big dude. All right, let's close with PG.
Hello, Matt O'Leary. PG from Long Island here. Thank you for taking my call. A couple things. I want to comment on that YouTube video you did last week where Eric Allen was pushing back on the narrative that Justin Fields holds the ball too long. Well, Justin Fields holds the ball too long. And Eric Allen pushing back on it without any facts is really a result of him not really being a reporter at all, but he's a PR guy. He's Jets media public relations. And, that's his job. So nothing wrong with that. I wish he would ask tougher questions when he does do his interviews. But again, he's a PR guy. So him pushing back on that was just really a function of him doing his job as Jets PR. Another thing I wanted to talk about was Aaron Glenn gave a shout out to the former regime for having good quality, high character guys in that locker room. I'm not going to replay the entire Joe Douglas thing. In my opinion, Joe Douglas almost did a good job as a Jets GM, especially some of his trades, especially early on. But the one thing that I can't wrap my head around is the John Franklin Myers trade. When he traded in 2024 draft day for a 2026 six-round pick. Now, John Franklin Myers is a very good player. Some people say, they save some cap space. And maybe save a little cap space, but again, Denver restructured his contract so he was out there. The Jets evidently never even made an attempt to do that. So I still can't wrap my head around that trade unless the only reason I can think of is Joe Douglas did it really to help John Franklin Myers out. Son Reddick was supposedly coming in. Franklin Myers' playing time was going to be decreased, and maybe he thought he was doing the kid a favor by sending him somewhere where he can get some playing time and continue growing his career. I don't know, though. Is that something that GMs do? You wouldn't think so. You think every trade they make would be, every move they make would be to help improve the team. But I can't think of another reason why he would make that trade. It just makes no sense. Anyway, Matt O'Leary, love to get your thoughts on that. And as always, go Jets.
I see what you're saying, PG, but I have a hard time with that, especially because if you remember where the Jets were, like, vibes-wise. They thought they were going to be a competitive team. They thought they'd be pushing for a playoff spot. When you want to have that depth in place, I know you want to do right by your players too, but JFN was a good player for them for a long time, and they had very deep defensive line units. And he was still productive, even on some of their deeper units when they had Bryce Huff the year prior rotating in and having 10-plus sacks. So you still had JFM playing a high percentage of snaps, and especially on early downs against the run. I think that was honestly one of the worst not the worst, because there's some pretty egregious ones, unfortunately, with some misses in the draft, or if you even want to talk, you mentioned Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick's a great one. But the JFM trade was awful, horrendous, and they were awful against the run last year. They missed his presence greatly, and it hurt him. It really, really did. I think you're spot on with Eric Allen, and I don't mean it as any disrespect to Eric Allen. I think he does his job well for what he is doing, but when you are employed by the team, it's kind of your job to put out a specific pro Jets narrative, right? Like, you're not going to see someone on the Jets official YouTube page or their socials and really criticizing. And that's fine. Like, if that's the content that you want to consume, like by all means. And I think some of their interviews that they do are really interesting. He has access to the guys that I don't have. What's different between him and I don't work for anybody. So I genuinely make videos on how I feel. I don't do, some people do like, oh, I'm going to do a video, try to get as many clicks as possible or have it take it for as many clicks as possible. That's not me. I just really try to call it as I see it. If they're doing something well, say it. If they're not, bring it up. And that's all was doing with Justin Fields. I like Fields. I'm rooting for him to be the long-term guy. I think it'd be awesome. I think he's a good kid. I think he's a good leader. It's going to be really fun to watch this year. All those things said, we can't pretend like it's all sunshine and rainbows and just, to me, gloss over something that happened in training camp or mini camp, number one, but has been an issue for him in his career. I think that's doing a disservice to the audience because you're not giving him the full story. And that's what I try to do. I just try to give both sides and give you a fair view. And yeah, I have opinions, but I'll tell you why I feel that way because X, Y, Z. So that's all. But good call, PG. That'll do it for us on this one. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'm Matt O'Leary, and I'll catch you guys next time.